What's up, YouTube? It's Jacob from Straight Line MTB, and today I'm going to talk about the first ride review of the big, long transition Spire. All right, thank you for joining me once again on Straight Line MTB, and today I'm going to be talking about some of our first rides on this beautiful transition Spire. This is the alloy version in the Diore build. If you want to get a little bit more information about this build, go to our channel and check out the overview video that we posted, just going over some of the parts of this bike and get you a little bit more detail on the frame and all the parts. The transition Spire, with its super long geometry, 170 millimeters front and rear, a 1285 millimeter wheelbase, and a 63-degree head tube angle in a size large. These numbers are very reminiscent of the Commencal Almeida AM that we reviewed, and that bike was just a plow wagon that liked to be pointed downhill and just really eat that rocks and chunk. So my expectation of the Spire was going to be very similar, although the geometry of the Spires looks a little bit more balanced than the Maida AM. I did expect it to be a little bit more of a handful on the uphills, and then on the downhills that are a little bit more smooth, or some of our cross-country trails. So let's get in to see if this bike lived up to my expectations or not. Pointing this bike uphill, that was the first part that I was a little bit apprehensive about, because I know our Commencal Almeida with that long wheelbase wasn't the easiest climber just due to those long numbers. I was pleasantly surprised, especially for a 170 millimeter bike, that this bike wasn't a pig on the uphills, and it wasn't horrible climbing. I didn't find myself struggling too much. Of course, with the longer wheelbase and that slack head tube angle, you're gonna have to have a little bit more forethought if you're getting into some of the more tighter turns. You're gonna have to think a little bit more, maybe swing her out a little bit more. The head tube angle being a 63-degree, I didn't find it raising, where sometimes where you're grunting on some of these bikes with short chain stays, you'll kind of get a little bit front end lift. This bike has the 445 chain stay length, so that really helped keep the front end calm. You're not going to get away from the length of the bike, but I found in the technical, really rocky stuff that this bike had plenty of traction, and those little bit longer chain stays gave you that traction to get you up the hill. Before getting in the downhill aspect of this bike, I wanted to point out just the feeling sitting in the cockpit of this bike. You think with the 485 reach, it's going to be super long, but it felt very comfortable. I felt centered on the bike. I didn't feel too hunched over or too sat up too much. That 78.1 degree seat tube angle is very steep and puts you in a great position to get that power to really claw up those climbs. I did push the saddle almost all the way forward to get a little bit more, I guess, steepness on that seat tube angle, because as you know, on these, the higher you raise these the saddles, the slacker it gets. So I think I'm past that threshold. So, but all in all, this bike felt very comfortable and sit and pedal for days. Getting onto the downhills, this bike at 38 pounds, while I didn't feel that weight on the uphills as much as I expected, I think that weight really helped on the downhills. So this bike, I'm just gonna say, first off, this is not a plow bike. This is not a super plush bike similar to the Nuke Proof Mega 290, where that bike really just felt really comfortable and plush going downhill. This bike has its own character, and I say, right, the early impression is that it feels very similar to the Transition Sentinel V2. It has this really fun, poppy, playful character to it. It's not something you would think you're going to get from a 170 millimeter long super monster bike, but it does give you this amount of playfulness and fun that really opens up your ability to enjoy trails. So on our super chunky, nasty downhill runs, that long wheelbase and those longer chain stays did help kind of mask a little bit of its sporty character, where you can just, the faster you go, the more it wanted to plow. So like I said, it's sporty, but it wasn't uncomfortable. On the more mellow trails, that's where that sporty fun characteristic comes into play, because it doesn't feel like a bike that's super boring or it's not having a good time riding those trails. It really is poppy. It wants to jump around. So on our fast berm trails with little poppy jumps, this bike is a blast. You know, you are throwing around a little bit more longer wheelbase and more weight, but it's not hindering you back. It almost feels like it's a 160 millimeter carbon bike, because that weight doesn't really come into play that much. And then also I did take it on a cross country route, which is about 11 and a half, 12 miles, and it's ups and downs and not super easy. And this bike didn't feel like it was out of its element, where other bikes like a Commons Almeida or the new Proof Mega did feel a little bit more work getting up the hill and then down the hill. So this bike really is something. Transition's doing something great with their bikes, not making them super boring, and they're able to handle all that nasty chunk on the downhill. So looking at this build, I'm not going to go too much into the build itself, but I want to highlight a few things. And first, I want to highlight this front shock, the Marzocchi Z1. I thought it would just be kind of a budget, ho-hum, get it done fork, but I don't really feel like it is that. It does step up for I guess I'd say a budget fork, because this bike does come at $3,800 US. This fork performed really well, and that 36 millimeter stanchions didn't feel flexy or out of place on this bike. Maybe I need to ride a little bit more and see if I notice it, but that was something that I was very surprised with. Also, another thing is the Diore group set. While it is the budget Shimano, it does carry a little bit more weight than the SLX and XT and XTR. It's been great. I haven't had any issues with it. One thing I did notice, and it's not a knock on this bike, but on some of the other Shimano Diore that we have, the other Polygon we have, is it does get a little bit crunchy and gritty when things are wet, but just got to keep your drivetrain clean so you don't get that nasty crunch. I have got a couple questions from some of our subscribers and our followers about the Float X rear shock. It's been pointed out that all the other builds come with RockShox Super Deluxe, and it sounds like they might be a little bit harsh on the square edge hits. I did try to focus more on that on some of our first rides, and I wouldn't say that I noticed anything where it was harsh or felt weird over square edge hits outside of its character, because of course, like I said, it is a little bit more sporty, but I didn't feel anything where I was getting bucked or on the square edge hits that it felt weird or was ramping up odd. So I think the Float X is doing a great job in that back end, keeping everything as calm and smooth as possible. As you can see, I have some different parts on this bike. I have the Noble TR37 carbon wheels. I have the Specialized Butcher T9 and Eliminator T7 out back. I have a 1-up carbon bar and an anvil stem. So those are some changes that I've recently made to this bike. I'm not going to go into it because we're going to do a little bit more content on the carbon setup and the different changes we have. So keep an eye out, but I will say this bike stock out of the box with pedals came in at just over 38 pounds. These small changes that I have made have brought this bike just under 36 pounds. And as you can imagine, especially with that rotating mass, it has given a little bit more pep to its step. But again, stay tuned to Straightline MTB here on YouTube and Instagram, and we will get you more information coming up. Thank you guys for joining me today as I talk about this amazing bike, the Transition Spire. Don't forget to give a like and subscribe, because you don't want to miss out on the long-term review of this awesome bike and some more information on these carbon wheels and carbon bar that I have on this bike, as well as you can check out some of our awesome reviews such as the Transition Sentinel V2 and the Meta AM that we reference in this video. Also, don't forget, go check us out on Instagram and TikTok at Straightline_MTB. Get a dose of Straightline MTB and see what kind of crazy stuff we're doing. And again, thank you guys for joining me, and we'll check you on the next video.